Yes, I thought I'd tell you a bit about how we did data.gov.uk and how and what lessons are to be learned from that. I think the experience that certainly we've had is that every organisation that tries to release data has to go on its own journey. There's no sort of quick route to this. So in talking about this, I'm hoping I'll give you some ideas of what you might do in your institution, some of the objections and obstacles that will come along the way, some of the things you need to set up, and help you by giving a bit of a roadmap for your own journeys. Just in terms of data.gov.uk, the timeline, there have been some general talk about freeing up data, opening up the government's data for about 2 years before 2009, starting with a report called the Power of Information report. But at that point it was mainly talk and hadn't been operationalised. And then suddenly it all started to happen very quickly. On the 2nd of June 2009, I had a letter from the Prime Minister's office saying the Prime Minister's interested in opening up data. Could he have a plan of what could be done within 6 months, how much it would cost, how you would organise it, and what could be achieved. There's no particular urgency about this in the way the Prime Minister's office write out. Something by 5 o'clock today would be quite soon enough. So I sat down and wrote the plan that we then executed. And that was announced a week later in very general terms that the government was moving in that direction. And the first version of data.gov.uk was actually went live on the 30th of September 2009, although at that point it was only visible to developers. One of the things we decided to do was work very closely with prospective users of the data to ensure that the site and the data that we're putting up there met their needs, because the important thing is actually getting the applications, not just releasing the data. The public launch was on the 21st of January 2010, a further 3 months on, a lot of enhancements put on the site in response to feedback from developers, and in that time we've been collecting a bit more data as well. Nicely reviewed by Read Write Web, comparing it to the United States efforts. Although it did have some problems for us because Read Write Web has got 1 million followers on Twitter. So when Read Write Web put this up, their followers immediately went to their page and immediately went through and looked at data.gov.uk. And so we had this surge of demand. We were sort of not slash-dotted, but Read Write Webbed. That was an awkward hour or 2 hours as we had a lot of traffic through. And now data.gov.uk as it is today, all this is sort of changing. You'll see the colour scheme has changed. It's got a bit more now about visualising the data. We put some applications within the site to visualise the data, and that's been important for the transparency agenda. But over the 2 years, we have released over 7,100 data sets. The total's now 7,500. That included 37 gigabytes of geospatial data from the Ordnance Survey, the UK's national mapping agency, basically their low and medium resolution catalogue we just made free, which had previously been charged for. We've set out something called public data principles, but as I'll explain in a bit, those are not cast in stone. We've created an open government license, and I'll talk a bit more about that. We've introduced, and this is part of the new government's policy, transparency of senior civil service salaries, not just rangers, but what individual senior civil servants are paid. Transparency of spending, so every government department and agency publishes within 15 working days of the end of the month the individual invoice payments that it's made in that last month, who the payments were to, what they were for, how much they were. And there's now transparency of contracts and tenders put out by government. And the website data.gov.uk has been regularly refreshed and extended in response to feedback from its users. So what lessons learned along the way? Well, people ask me, is this best done top-down or bottom-up? And the answer is both. It's absolutely essential, in my experience, to have top-down political support. And we've been privileged in data.gov.uk to have had the personal and meaningful backing of both the previous Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, who said public information does not belong to the government, it belongs to the public who've paid for it, and the current Prime Minister, David Cameron, who's said greater transparency across government is at the heart of our commitment to enable the public to hold public bodies to account. And in both cases, these have not just been words. The Prime Minister and his office have worked with us to ensure that this message is heard throughout government. At the same time, it's been very important to have bottom-up demand. And in the UK, we've had a very active civil society demanding data. And I draw particular attention to My Society, who are a not-for-profit organisation who believe in using technology to empower citizens and to promote civic activism. So, for instance, they started with a site called They Work For You, which had information about members of Parliament, who they were, what they did, what they said in Parliament. They have an iconic application called Fix My Street, which has encouraged citizens to report issues in the physical environment, and so on. We also had a strong campaign from The Guardian newspaper, who've really taken the lead in the UK on data journalism for the government to open up its data. You know, give us back our crown jewels was the classic headline in The Guardian. And we've had bodies like the Open Knowledge Foundation, who are an international grouping, but some of them are based in the UK, Dr. Rufus Pollock, for instance, arguing away, and they have led on sites like Where Does My Money Go, and tracking down government spending and so on. But it's also essential to have a passionate team to do this. Freeing up data, convincing different agencies and departments to release data is a wearing job, so the team have to be passionate. And just seeing it as a 9-to-5 job, just going through the process, doesn't get the data released. The team had to be absolutely passionate in not accepting no for an answer from all sorts of people, finding ways around various rules and structures in government. We set some coherent policy principles, which we call the Public Data Transparency Principles, and those are on the data.gov.uk website. But these are sort of evolutionary principles. We tried not to get involved in a big policy debate to start with, not least because we were afraid that any sort of policy formally articulated would get things attached to it. So it would be good policy, but people would put in subject to available resources, you know, to the extent that is appropriate, to the extent that works in relation to other government objectives, and so on and so on. And so create lots of wriggle room. It's room for bureaucrats to find reasons not to release their data. So we decided to stop with a set of very broad principles and use those as guidance in applying them. And I won't go through these in detail. I put them in the slide set, so you'll be there to see them. But just drawing out some key principles. What we release needs to be clearly driven by public and businesses what they want. So this is not just what the government wants to provide, it's also got to be sensitive to what people want and can use. That data will be released under an open license and actually under the same open license, so we'll have consistency across government, and the license will enable commercial reuse, and that's, you know, that commercial reuse is absolutely essential, not least because in cases previously where we tried to distinguish between commercial and non-commercial, we found some unintended policy consequences, such as some very small charities suddenly turned out to be commercial. We should release data quickly and then republish it in linked data form. So not waiting until the information is perfect or the formatting is ideal. Get out what we can in raw data form and then work to improve that. And that public bodies should actively encourage the reuse of their public data. This is what Dr. Rufus Pollock calls the ecosystem of open data. It's not just enough to put the data out there. You've got to think about how that's going to be supported, how that's going to be documented, how changes are going to be communicated, and how you're going to get feedback on that. In terms of licensing, we decided to go for UK Open Government License, which is broadly the same as Creative Commons by attribution, and it's designed to be interoperable with Creative Commons by attribution, and we worked with Creative Commons on this. A number of reasons why we didn't just use Creative Commons by attribution. There were some safeguards that we needed, such as the use of the royal crest and those sorts of things, which we'd have had to put an exception into Creative Commons by attribution. We also were concerned, and we've seen this in jurisdictions that have tried to use Creative Commons by attribution, that individual agencies will use that as a basis, but then put additional restrictive clauses in. So we wanted a license that worked broadly across government, that was genuinely open, and that we could say to departments, you are not allowed to add additional conditions to this license. You will publish your data under this license and precisely this license. We decided to go very much for incremental delivery, not trying to release all the data at once. The first sets of data we released were low-hanging fruit, easy to release, working with the departments and agencies that were prepared to release data. Too often in these initiatives, you spend your early months arguing with the refuseniks, the people who do not want to do it. Instead, we decided in the first few months to work with those who were prepared to give this a go, who were prepared to work with us and work through the problems with them. And then as we gained experience, we created precedent of data that could be released. Then we went back and pressed harder on the more reluctant agencies. And as you'll see from this graph, that's got a steady growth of new data sets coming through. And what's not clearly shown on this is actually within that, we've also had existing data sets, new files, new years' worth of data have been coming through for those as well. But it's not just about releasing new data. The scope for opening up data also includes data previously published, but not in an open way. So that's meant data previously published in a non-reusable format. And one of the early heroes of data.gov.uk, all the data they published was actually data they'd already published in printed form, but they just released the underlying spreadsheets that had that data in it. So there was no big policy issue for them in doing that because the information was already out there in terms of confidentiality. And once they understood that they could do well just by releasing the machine-readable form of that and under an open license, they were very happy to do it. We've pushed for data that has previously been published but under a restricted license, say with conditions on use or restricted for commercial reuse, actually working to free that up so it's genuinely open. We found quite a lot of data that was fairly freely available, but only to specialist groups. So there was data, for instance, on neighbourhood renewal and urban renewal projects that was useful for people working on neighbourhood renewal projects. A very rich store of data that was free and available to people working on these projects, but not available to others. And there was no good reason for that. It was just that that data had been drawn together for neighbourhood renewal. So we made that generally available. Sometimes it's about data that's only previously available for payment. And those are actually quite good cases because there's no question about whether you can release this data. It's all about, is someone going to pay for it? Now, when we looked at some of those payment cases, the payment, the amount they get in, the amount they receive, in some cases is not very much more than the costs of actually enforcing the payment, of collecting the payment, of billing, of enforcing the IP against unauthorized use. Even in the most efficient case we came across, 50% of the sales income went into cost of administering the sales. And I think Graham Vickery in his work for the European Commission on the reuse of public sector information has estimated that across the EU there is about €1 billion sales income from public sector information, and the economic benefit from opening up that data will be of the order of €140 billion. So that shows again that actually the sale of this information doesn't bring in a lot of money compared to the economic value, and it suppresses demand. We found information only given out in response to freedom of information requests. And for some reason, departments and agencies like the information to be beaten out of them by a hostile freedom of information request rather than make a virtue of a necessity and just publish it. And data that was difficult to find and difficult to understand. We had to work through the concerns of data owners. And Tim Berners-Lee, when he launched the Open Data Initiative internationally in the TED Talk, said people hug their database. They don't want to let it go. You've no idea of the number of excuses people will come up with. Well, I have some idea of the number of excuses. There are over 40 excuses in my catalogue. My favourite one is about in the middle of this chart. You won't be able to read these all. We know the data is wrong, but people will tell us where it's wrong, and we will waste valuable resources inputting the corrections people send us. These people don't want to get their data right. That having been said, you've got to work with data owners through this. Often, the excuses are just rationalizing the fear of the unknown. They've never released this data. There must be a good reason why they've never released this data. Let's think of a plausible reason why we shouldn't release it, because they've not really thought about this before. Example and precedent are very much your friends in this. Once some departments have released the data, then you can use that as precedents for others. For the first phase, sometimes we've had to compromise on what parts of the data will be released, knowing that we then can go back later and say, well, you released this bit of the data, now will you consider releasing that other bit of the data? And as somebody said yesterday, once you've released it, you can't take it back. So that's a ratchet type process. What we've not done at all is compromise on license. Where people have proposed, well, we'll release all of our data but under restrictive license. We've said no. If it's part of this initiative, it's got to be open. And we'll take a subset of the data, thank you very much, that's going to be truly open. And we've wanted to ensure that data owners get credit for what they do release. So a bit of celebration. You need to manage expectations and prepare for mistakes. And the Prime Minister gave some very good expectation management. These are just tiny, tiny steps. This is just a small start. The information we're publishing won't be perfect, but we're not going to hang around until it's perfect. We're going to get on with it. And we found mistakes. that some data was misclassified. So as part of the UK National Rail Travel Survey, it turns out someone has put in the metadata for bacon and ham production statistics. Interestingly, this had been on another website elsewhere in government for over a year and nobody had spotted it. When we put it on data.gov.uk, it was spotted within 24 hours. We've also been using engaging users to help improve the quality of data. So we released data on the location of 300,000 bus stops in the UK. 18,000 of those bus stops were wrongly geocoded. And working with OpenStreetMap, there's been a project to clean up that data and improve not only the public data set, but the data set back in the Department for Transport. Skip over that. And we've also come to appreciate the importance of government as a key provider of data to the wider economy. That it provides core reference ontologies, core reference data about things, places, things that the government licenses, and so on. And so government has a greater responsibility to get those ontologies right, to get that reference data out there, so the rest of the economy can function. And finally, just continuously engaging with developers, hackathons, hack events, sometimes on a departmental basis, sometimes around a particular theme, young rewired state, engaging young people in using the data, and always highlighting the applications, not the data. Creating heroes of agencies who give data, so celebrating success. Creating heroes of the totemic data releases, and releasing the salaries of senior civil servants was certainly a wake-up call to senior civil servants, senior members of the bureaucracy, that open data had arrived. And believe me, once your salary has been published as open data, you're much more inclined to ask somebody else to publish their data as open data because it's already been done to you. And heroes among the developers. So a number of developers have got sort of feted for developing really innovative applications of the data. And this was a girl called Isabel Long, who took the government's real-time energy usage data and crunched it with a little application to find out which government departments don't switch off their lights and their computers at night. Finally, this isn't an IT project, and don't let it become one. The IT people need to be on side, but they normally do not have control of the data in the sense they can authorize its release. It belongs to the business. The key issues have been business, policy, and politics, and so we've worked hard to ensure that it wasn't branded just IT. We've used cloud technologies to reduce costs and scale capacity easily. So hosting the Treasury, the UK Ministry of Finance's central database of government spending, which is about 5 gigabytes, and very, very popular download. I think the first year's hosting cost was $71 US on Amazon S3. So cheap that I couldn't actually bill the Treasury back for the hosting cost, because it would have cost us over 100 UK pounds to raise an invoice and accept a payment for it. And there's lots of good open source available. CCAN, we've used CCAN, Drupal, Linux, MediaWiki, Varnish, Apache, but the website itself is just a means, not an end. So, bottom line, you've got to drive this top down with political backing, and bottom up from pressure from civil society, and middle out with a strong, passionate team. You've got to adapt the policy to experience. You've got to handle the concerns of the data owners, and that means a lot going through the same points again and again and again, because in a government, every department, every agency thinks they're special and different. So you've got to go through the issues again and again. You've got to manage the risks and the expectations. You've got to recognize the responsibilities as a provider of key ontologies, and work with the developers. It's not just an IT project, and what you really want to do is to get applications out there using the data so citizens and businesses can take advantage of what the government has invested in. And finally, you can debate this until the cows come home, as we say in England. You can debate this forever. We've tried to overcome the obstacles practically by doing things. Some things have been too difficult and we've put them back and said we'll come back to that later. But actually doing this practically, you learn how to do it, you gain confidence, you work out how to manage certain risks and so on. So, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'd be very happy to take some questions if we've got time.